I was the first film student at the Art Institute of Chicago. And so they had just, Sam Brackish had been lecturing there, and he came in once a week and gave a lecture. And there's a filmmaker by the name of John Schofield, now John Luther, and there was a guy by the name of Owen Lamb, who was George Landau at that time. And I remember going there and having lunch at the Art Institute, the museum, and sitting down with Stan Brakhage and John, and they were trying to woo me, and it was pretty interesting, because I think I may have seen some Brakhage before then, but and I certainly read about Brakhage, but it was interesting to actually, you know, sit down and them trying to get me to come there, and we had a nice conversation. I do remember the first conversation looking at him, and of course I'd only seen pictures of him, you know, and he and Jane, all these pictures, and I looked at him and I'd say, you know, you're not as thin as you used to be. Which was like, he said, that was the beginning of our conversation, you know. And then I went to the house where John and George lived with some other people, and it was kind of sort of a hippie crash pad of sorts. And but I was impressed, and I made a film called Silent Reversal, which I think is really probably the most important film from that era, because it was I had seen the Cornell film, and I'd seen the Brakhage film, Wonder Ring, and it also was familiar enough with Hollison, you know, talking about palindrome. I figured they never really got it, you know, so I was going to do it. I was going to make perfect palindrome, which I did. What I did is, or anagram actually, what I did is I took a roll of regular 8 film, which is just like 16mm, except it has an extra perforation in between, and shot it in a 16 camera. And I shot the elevated in Chicago. And then I turned around the film and shot it back the other way. One time I shot it on one set of sprocket holes and on another set of sprocket holes. So, excuse me. So what you have is 2 films. So what happened is that the projections would show the film and had little X's where to put the X in the gate, and they would show it. And then rather than rewind it, they would simply take the feed and take-up reel and reverse them and play it back the other direction. Of course, you'd have half a field off, and so it would show a different film. Not only that, but I was always struck with it had to be a silent film, but I was always struck with the sort of blinding light that came out of the elevator when it make these sparks and these flashes of light. So I took and I shot it so that it was probably almost like a 16:9 kind of format with black in between, which is where the overlap would be. So you don't have any overlap, no double exposure. But in that black area, I took a splicer and made a series of almost musical notation with a scraper, which has, if you scratch film, it tends to leave a blue kind of residue. Mm-hmm. And so you have this film, these kind of jabs underneath, so it would be black, and then you'd have this motion underneath, which would be sort of like a visual version of an acoustic phenomenon, this screeching of the elevator. Mm-hmm. So it struck me. It was always interesting to me because when during that time you did a lot of dog and pony shows, a lot of talking, show your films and talk shows, especially if you made short films. And so it was great because you could show the film, and then you could say, right now, I'm going to show you the same film again, and then you could turn the projectionist into a performer and say, right now we have a performance artist. I don't think I would have used the word performance artist, but we have somebody performing for you in the projection booth. They're taking explain the process of switching reels, and they're going to show you back the same film. So it made a lot of very kind of quiet and nebbish projection. It's very nervous, and all of a sudden everybody turns around in their chairs to look in the booth window, and then they project it back the other way. But it's visually pretty interesting, and I think it's wonderful because it's like it's a holiday, and there's American flags down. There's a window in the elevator, so it's not like claustrophobic like the Chicago subway. You could actually see the window, and you could see down Main Street, Chicago, and it has flags down. It's a very at the time, I think, it was influenced by painting. It has a colors of the Nighthawks, the painting the Nighthawks,
Mm.
which I walked past every day when I went into Chicago. And of course, if you went to the museum, it was warmer. And so you drift your way through the museum going to the school, so you didn't have to walk outside where the wind would be coming off the lake. You know, it really was that UCSD art department really was a substation of New York. Everybody was from New York pretty much. I mean, Alan Kaplan wasn't from New York, I mean, at that time. But mostly people were New Yorkers or ex-New Yorkers, with probably the exception of someone like Jean-Pierre, who was obviously from France. But it was a really East Coast, and people came from there. It was really, you know, a hub, and they hired people to come teach from New York. It was not connected to LA. It was connected to New York. It was a very, I mean, conceptually and all that stuff, it was really much connected to LA. And so the film scene, you know, even Jean-Pierre would be back to Europe and be back to LA. Same thing with May Farber. It was all that direction. Now, Stanish, he came from Yale, so his connection's all East Coast too. So, you know, there was not a real connection. What made the connection is the students, both graduate students and undergraduate students who were coming from there, that, you know, either whether they had screenings or they got work there, whatever, really initiated a lot of the discourse.